Good morning, good afternoon, depends at what time my contribution will be shared with you via this medium. I am José Ramos-Horta, now President of Timor-Leste, my second term, and unable to join you. I thank Floriane Lavoud for her kindness in inviting me and for making sure that my modest contribution can be shared with all of you. I have had obviously very long relationship, very long engagement with the United Nations for the first quarter of a century, from end of 75 to 99, both as an observer, as a frustrated citizen of my country, Timor-Leste, disappointed with the inability of the United Nations as a whole to do anything to rectify a particular situation in my country, in Timor-Leste. But also throughout those years, I was able to observe other UN actions or in other situations like Middle East. How many years the situation in Palestine, in Middle East, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been on the UN agenda. Nothing closer to a solution. Whose responsibility? Well, usually easier to assign responsibility to someone. So assign responsibility to what we could say an abstract organization. If we take member states out of an organization, we talk about an abstract organization. The United Nations does not exist in itself with a Secretary General and with the bureaucracy in East River or with other agencies across the world. It exists because of member states. And all of us, small and big, rich and poor, have a say, supposedly, in the organization, both in general, whether it is General Assembly, ECOSOC, the numerous agencies, or particular bodies to which we are elected. One is the UN Security Council. We know for 80 years how often the Security Council is paralyzed in trying to deal with particular situations. We don't need to go back to the Congo War with Dag Hammarskjöld and the other Secretary General after. And so many other conflicts over the years that we witness directly or indirectly. Veto by one superpower or another, blocking UN action, whether in Middle East or whether more recent is in the Rwanda genocide. Couldn't the Rwanda genocide have been prevented? Yes, it could have been prevented. But it did go ahead, it did happen, genocide, right under the eyes of the UN, because some powerful individuals elsewhere decided that no reinforcements would be sent to Rwanda. If you go to the Kigali Genocide Museum, as I did many years ago, there is reference there to those who blocked and those noble people who pushed in the Security Council for an expanded, stronger UN response to prevent genocide in Rwanda. In the case of Timor-Leste in 1999, the UN acted in a very swift manner. One of the few occasions in recent decades of the UN where a crisis erupted, public opinion mobilized, including in the capitals of the powers that be, including in Washington, in the US Congress, but also unlikely institutions like the World Bank and IMF. Not many know about it, but the World Bank and IMF issued a rare joint statement on the case of East Timor in 1999, warning about possible sanctions if the violence did not stop. The Security Council came together and they agreed essentially on what we could call a coalition of the willing, authorized by the Security Council. Countries were ready, namely Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, South Korea. Participation was possible by one single vote from the opposition side. A member of the Korean parliament walked over to the government side, led by President Kim Dae-jun, and voted to authorize Korean troops to participate in INTERFET, the international force, East Timor. But very important to emphasize this. INTERFET was made possible only because Indonesia agreed to it. Maybe we can say Indonesia agreed under coercion by the domestic situation. Suharto had been replaced by a more liberal, conservative civilian leader, President B.J. Habibie, a technocrat, who had agreed on a referendum in Timor-Leste, referendum organized by the UN. Violence erupted upon announcing the result of the referendum. Indonesia itself lost control on the security in the territory, but the Indonesian president, the Indonesian army leadership agreed to honor the results of the referendum and to withdraw their forces from the territory, their forces replaced by an international force led by Australia. Interesting to understand what went on behind the scenes. Under Kofi Annan leadership, together with the then coordinating Minister for Security and Political Affairs in Indonesia, later President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, a good man, reformist in the Indonesian army, together with the then Foreign Minister of Thailand, Dr. Surin Pitsuwan, acting on behalf of ASEAN, they negotiated, they talked to get as many Asian faces as possible. That was Indonesia's request. So we got many Asian countries participating in INTERFET, namely Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, then South Korea, Japan. China participated later with a significant police contingent. New Zealand participated. That helped saving face a bit. It was necessary to have an Asian face in the international security force for Timor-Leste. The lesson is that the UN Security Council is able to intervene early on in a timely fashion before too many deaths, before too much destruction. If there is goodwill, strong will on the parties involved, members of the Security Council, in particular United States and other members of the Security Council, and the country that is going to receive the peace force enforcement have to agree. In this case, Indonesia vacated the territory, agreed to leave, to be replaced by an international force. The lesson is there has to be constant consultation. There has to be courage, audacity on the part of everyone, the UN Secretary General, the people working with him, and member states have to understand and cherish the role of the Secretary General and not undermining him. In the case of Timor-Leste, Kofi Annan played central role, but because he got very favorable hearing from Bill Clinton in Washington, Tony Blair in UK, and other permanent members of the Security Council, China, the Russian, they all operated, and all with different approaches on efforts on how to have the force deployed with Indonesia's green light. President Kim Dae-jung of South Korea, who would know? I know from my direct participation or inside sources. President Bill Clinton called Kim Dae-jung of South Korea so that Kim Dae-jung, as Asian, South Korean, would talk to Jiang Zemin of China, would talk to Obuchi of Japan. Antonio Guterres was incredibly forceful, articulate, persuasive in talking with Bill Clinton to have the United States fully engaged, take a leadership. Australia, New Zealand, all of this happened in exceptional diplomatic orchestration. So there has to be consensus, goodwill on the part of everybody involved. And then on the ground, there is a strong, united Timorese leadership led by our super charismatic leader, Mr. Xanana Guzmão, whom the Portuguese would sit to listen, who the United Nations would listen, everybody in Timor would listen. So he was the one single authority who made a decision for us. In other situations, whether Syria, whether now Palestine, if there are too many parties and no agreement, there is division, factionalism, then the best of intentions of outside powers also very difficult to resolve. But how could the UN Security Council be more democratic? Just some words on that. I do not believe that by increasing the numbers in itself would make the UN more effective, Security Council more effective. Of course, we need a larger number. I would agree, 31 members. Why not? Too many? No. The General Assembly has 180 plus. And it doesn't show that the General Assembly is more effective or less effective because it has so many countries. Security Council has to reflect the current world membership. There has to be more balance in the regional representation. Let me say right now, the so-called Eastern European group is not serious. Not that countries, leaders of the are not serious. I mean, this concept of having an Eastern European group, this came from the Cold War era, from the immediate post-World War II, immediate San Francisco meeting, negotiations with the Soviet Union to have a more fair representation by Soviet Union. Any justification to keep the Eastern European group separate from the Western group, and they are not in fact separate, it is already part of the Western group, is a bit to say that, well, sorry, Southeast Asia group is as legitimate as the East European group. Southern Africa group is legitimate. So why Africa has only the African Union, and it is Africa that is represented, not every regional organization in Africa. And the Europeans have the Western group plus the Eastern European group. This has to be discarded so that the 500 million Europeans are represented by a proportional number. Southeast Asia alone is almost 700 million people with only 11 countries. And you have an overrepresentation when you put together Eastern Europe with the rest. How about the veto? The veto has to be discarded. But discarding the veto alone in itself will not resolve the problem. Veto has to be discarded, replaced by a two-thirds majority decision in the Security Council. The same day, or within maximum 24 hours, the majority two-thirds decision binding by the Security Council has to be ratified by two-thirds majority in the General Assembly. This way, I think it will carry weight, more possibility of the powers that be, United States, Russia, China, and so on, to agree to it. In the sense, if we don't have a mechanism that can restrain or can give more legitimacy to a two-thirds majority in the Security Council, by having a two-thirds majority confirmation in the General Assembly, that would be very difficult. Election of the Secretary General. Secretary Generals were never really the big problem of the UN. We have one of the greatest Secretary Generals ever, Antonio Guterres. Super informed, multilingual, former Prime Minister, former High Commissioner for Refugees, where he performed very well, incredibly good communicator. The problem is not Secretary General. The problem is not Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon. The problem is the powers that we want to vest on the Secretary General. In this regard, we have to see how more clearly powers of the Secretary General to bring to attention of the Security Council, of the General Assembly, what matters, what are the issues that we have to look at that, to give some greater power to the Secretary General, not to make decisions behind the Security Council of General Assembly, but to make recommendations in a manner that is timely, that can compel the Security Council to make decisions and deploy. I could go on. In my ideas, I've written plenty about it, but non-published over the past many years. I hope to be able to contribute in due course, sometime this year, next year, on the debate on the reform of the UN, reform of the Security Council. Election of the Secretary General. I agree, should be a woman. But a woman in the circumstances of today, it is not going to really invite too many qualified women around the world. The UN has to do the same like a major corporation, a university, headhunting. Election for Secretary General should be wide open to eligible, qualified people. We should look more at how to be more precise, the criteria, but my point is it should be open for anyone who meets certain criteria, terms of reference, to submit candidacy. It cannot continue to rely on a former foreign minister, a former undersecretary general of the UN, a former prime minister, etc., etc. There are thousands of qualified men in the world. Let's create a system that can facilitate the brightest to apply for the world's prestigious job. I thank you all for your attention.